there stood a house that held more than just memories. It held secrets that only the night could reveal, woven into the very wood and stone of its ancient frame. A house that seemed to watch the world with 1,000 window eyes, waiting for the right moment to share its truth. While the rest of the neighborhood was lost in sleep, a single light remained. A beacon in the darkness where a young boy named Jake was about to discover that the world he knew was only half the story. The night was no longer just a time for rest. It was a time for the extraordinary. Jake had always been different. While other children feared the dark, he was fascinated by it. He saw patterns in the dust motes and stories in the shadows. He knew with a certainty that only a child can possess that the shadows weren't just absences of light. They were presence. They were heavy with intent. As the clock ticked toward the final minute of the day, the air in the room grew heavy. It was a familiar weight now, a pressure that signaled the change. He held his breath, his eyes wide and unblinking. The world outside was silent, but inside this room, the symphony was about to begin. And then, the shadows began to wake. They didn't just move, they breathed. They detached themselves from the furniture like silk from a loom, swirling in a rhythmic, ancient dance. This wasn't a trick of the eyes. This was the moment Jake had been waiting for, the night the house finally spoke back. They weren't just shapes, they were figures, travelers from a world made of ink and moonlight. A tall traveler, silent and wise, and his companion, a bird of pure darkness. They didn't speak, but their message was clear. They were guides, and they were pointing toward a secret buried beneath the floor. The next morning, the magic of the night felt like a fever dream. Jake tried to explain: the dancing traveler, the silent bird, the feeling of the heavy air. But the sun has a way of turning mysteries into fairy tales. To his parents, the shadows were just products of a tired mind and a big imagination. "A vivid dream, Jake," his dad said with a loving wink. "Maybe less mystery TV before bed." But the frustration burned in Jake's chest. He didn't need their belief. He needed the truth. And if he couldn't find it with them, he knew exactly who would listen. He wasn't alone in this. Not yet. He needed Ethan. Ethan didn't just like mysteries. He lived for them. While others saw a playground, Ethan saw a headquarters. He didn't ask for proof. He asked for a flashlight. One handshake was all it took. The midnight detectives were officially on the case, ready to face whatever the shadows were hiding. They spent the afternoon planning. Ethan brought his detective kit, a collection of old flashlights, a compass that only sometimes worked, and a brand new notebook. They mapped every movement Jake had seen, treating the shadows like a code that needed to be cracked. They weren't just playing, they were investigating a legacy. Night after night, they watched. And night after night, the shadows returned, becoming more elaborate, more insistent. They were like silent actors in a play that only Jake and Ethan could see. The mystery wasn't just a moment, it was a conversation, and the boys were finally learning how to listen. Then came the night of the command. A shadow hand, clear as day, pointed to a single plank of wood beneath the bed. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. With trembling hands, Jake grabbed his screwdriver. This was the moment they had been working toward, the moment the floor would finally give up its secret. The wood groaned, a sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. As the plank gave way, a scent of old cedar and ancient paper filled the air. It was the smell of time itself. Beneath the dust of 80 years, something was waiting. Something that had been hidden away for a boy just like Jake. It was a journal, heavy with the weight of another life. The leather was worn, the silver clasp tarnished by decades of silence. Jake felt a strange warmth as he held it, as if the book were a living thing. This wasn't just a notebook, it was a key to a door they didn't even know existed yet. He turned the first page and his breath caught. 4 words, written in a hand that mirrored his own excitement and fear. "I see them too." It was a message across time, a bridge between 2 boys separated by 80 years. They weren't the first to see the shadows, and they wouldn't be the last. The journal belonged to Samuel, a boy who had lived here in the 1,940 seconds. He called the shadows the keepers. They weren't ghosts of people, he wrote, but guardians of stories. He spoke of a chamber hidden within the very bones of the house, a place where the shadows returned to rest and recharge the world's imagination. With Samuel's map as their guide, the real search began. Every hallway became a labyrinth, every shadow a potential clue. They moved through the house like ghosts themselves, listening for the secrets that the Victorian walls had been keeping for nearly a century. The house wasn't just a building, it was a living map. The attic was a graveyard of old lives, discarded chairs, boxes of moth-eaten clothes, and forgotten toys. It felt like the house was exhaling its history. They searched every corner, every nook, but the hidden chamber remained elusive. The journal's clues were cryptic, leading them in circles through the dust of the past. The basement was a world of stone and shadow. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth. Ethan's flashlight cut through the dark, revealing the massive foundations that held the house upright. They felt small here, tucked away in the roots of the building, still searching for the heartbeat of the mystery. Hours passed, and the excitement began to fade into exhaustion. Jake started to wonder if they had missed it, or if Samuel's journal was just the ramblings of another boy who wanted to believe in magic. Maybe the chamber didn't want to be found. But Ethan wasn't ready to give up. He knew the answer was here, hidden in plain sight. And then, Ethan saw it. A single book, tucked away among the encyclopedias. He pulled it, more out of instinct than hope. The sound was unmistakable, a heavy mechanical grind that vibrated through the floorboards. The wall wasn't just a wall, it was a door. The library had finally decided to share its secret. The bookshelf groaned as it gave way, revealing a passage that hadn't seen the light of a lantern in decades. The air that rushed out was cold and smelled of old stone and ancient ink. They stepped into the darkness, leaving the familiar world behind. They were no longer just boys. They were explorers of the unknown, walking into history. The stairs seemed to go on forever, spiraling down into the very foundations of the house. Every step was a heartbeat, every creak a reminder of how far they were from their beds. At the bottom, they found a door, a final barrier between them and the truth Samuel had died protecting. It was time to see what lay beyond. What they discovered next changed everything. A room lost to time, a sanctuary of stories. It wasn't a room of stone and dust. It was a room of light and legacy. Thousands of notebooks, journals, and scrolls, each one a life, each one a dream, guarded by the very shadows that had led them here. It was the heart of the world. It was a library of the human spirit. They saw maps of places that didn't exist on any globe, and inventions that looked like they were powered by starlight. This was the place where imagination was kept safe, where the stories that people forgot to tell came to live. It was more beautiful than any gold, more precious than any gem. Every scroll was a story. Some were adventures of daring heroes, others were quiet moments of kindness. There were tales of distant galaxies and stories of a single afternoon in a summer garden. They were the dreams of every person who had ever lived in this house and thousands who hadn't, all of them preserved in this glowing vault. In the center of it all sat the chest. It was the heart of the chamber, the source of the golden glow. Jake could feel a warmth emanating from the wood, a gentle hum that felt like 1,000 voices whispering at once. This was the heart of the mystery, the place where all the threads finally came together. One last door to open. There was no treasure in the traditional sense. No gold coins or silver bars, only stories. Hundreds of small, glowing books, each one a masterpiece of the mind. As Jake opened the lid, The chamber filled with the sounds of 1,000 adventures, the clashing of swords, the whisper of lovers, the laughter of children. The treasure was the imagination itself. The shadows weren't ghosts of people who had died. They were the shadows of people who had lived and dreamed. This was the legacy of Clara, who wrote of flying machines before they were ever built. Her imagination was still here, protected by the shadows she had created with her own words. Every story had a guardian, and here was Leo, who dreamed of the stars when the world was still learning to walk. The shadows had watched over him too, guiding his hand as he drew the future. They were the silent partners in every great idea, the whispers that came in the middle of the night to tell us that anything was possible. They were the memory of the world's best ideas. The shadows had chosen Jake because he was a watcher, a boy who valued the unseen. They were making sure that no story, no matter how small, was ever truly forgotten. In a world that was always moving faster, this room was a place of stillness, where the power of a single thought could live forever. The mystery was finally beautifully solved. Jake understood now. The shadows weren't there to scare him, they were there to welcome him. He wasn't just a boy in an old house, he was a keeper of the light. He felt a profound sense of peace, a connection to every dreamer who had ever walked these halls. He was no longer just Jake, he was a guardian. They left the chamber as they found it, a secret kept safe for the next generation. But they didn't leave empty-handed. They left with the knowledge that the world was far bigger and more magical than anyone else suspected. The library was no longer just a room of books, it was a doorway to the infinite. The secret was safe with them. The mystery was solved, but the magic remained. Every night at midnight, Jake would see them, the gentle guardians of his dreams. He wasn't just a boy in a room anymore. He was a part of something eternal. The shadows were just making sure the stories were never forgotten, and Jake had plenty of stories to tell. He was finally home. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved completely. They're meant to be protected. And as long as there are boys like Jake and Ethan, and as long as there are shadows in the night, the stories will live on. They were already writing their first chapter, a new legend for the keepers to guard. The cycle of imagination was beginning again. For Midnight Tales, I'm your storyteller. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, the next time you see a shadow move, it might just be a story waiting to be told. Keep dreaming, keep writing, and keep watching the dark. Good night, and may your dreams be as bright as the shadows.